My name is Kimberly Clinch. I am a Citizen Empowerment Coordinator for American Promise. Thank you all for taking time on your Monday night to join us for the September 2019 American Promise Association National Conference Call, a call that happens on the second Monday of each month. Whether you are here listening live or listening to the recording afterwards, you are stepping up on behalf of our Democratic Republic, so thank you. Tonight I have the honor of talking with our guest speaker, Annafi Wahed, founder of the daily newsletter, The Flipside, and after that we will hear a special grassroots victory this month, and then go on to talk about the letter of the month, writing a letter to the editor encouraging readers to contact their senators about SJ Res 51, the Senate bill proposing the Democracy for All amendment language. And then we'll wrap it up by doing a training on how to talk with a personal connection about attending NCLC. Hopefully that sounds good to folks. Before we dive into that agenda, though, I'd like to start by sharing a reminder and some perspective about why we do this work. And so the first part of this, starts with over Labor Day weekend. I visited a friend in DC and had the chance to go to the Newseum. So that's like news and museum, the Newseum, which is committed to commemorating all First Amendment rights, but especially freedom of the press. And the museum has it laid out so there's a particular path you follow through the museum. So the first exhibit that you go to, in the middle of the room, standing in the middle of the room is an actual portion of the Berlin Wall. And the exhibit is about the vast differences in rights that existed across less than 2 feet of concrete. And there's a quote from a former resident of West Berlin about a moment when he could hear someone on the other side crying out, "Help, help." And later in the path of the museum, as you follow, there's an exhibit about journalistic freedom in the world and the fact that less than 13% of the world's population lives in a country with a free press. And the data for this exhibit, it comes from Freedom House. So after our visit, I looked up Freedom House's website. I was looking at the information and data they've collected on general political freedom. Their latest annual report is entitled Democracy in Retreat. And as you might infer from that title, things are not on the up and up. In 2018 marks the 13th consecutive year of decline in global freedom. Less than 39% of the global population is considered free, and a decline in the level of freedom in the U.S. is cited as one of the contributing factors in this global decline. So I had these thoughts top of mind when last week a woman, Sarah Gifford, came into our offices here in Cambridge to show some of us the app that she and her husband are working on as, have built actually already as retired software engineers. The goal of the app is to improve voter education and participation. And in talking about what motivated them to do this work, she describes how her husband, as an immigrant, now a U.S. citizen, but went through the immigration process, knows more about American politics than she does as a natural-born citizen. And the reason for this is that as a kid, his mom would wake him and his brother up in the middle of the night to watch key moments in U.S. politics, like the State of the Union address, because she had been living in East Berlin during the Cold War, and she saw that wall come down, and to her, America represented a beacon of democracy. And in that moment, I thought back to the museum and to the 61% of the world that is not considered free, and was struck by the fact that the work we are doing is not just for our rights or even just for the rights of our fellow Americans, but for the world. Because people do look to us as a symbol of what is possible, which means that when we falter, we can fuel decline, but we can also fuel expansion of democracy. And we have before, and thanks to all of you on this call, we will absolutely be that beacon again. And as you will see, this connection is also a great story to bring up in relation to our guest speaker this month, Annafi Wahed. Annafi is the founder and editor of The Flipside, a daily newsletter that curates thoughtful commentary from liberal and conservative media in a 5-minute digest each morning. In July 2016, Annafi left a promising career in finance to campaign for Democratic Party candidates. Walking door to door in New Hampshire, she saw firsthand how even next-door neighbors could be completely isolated from one another by the news they consume. In the months following the election, as talk of fake news and media bias became commonplace, Annafi set out to burst her own bubble and the bubbles of those around her. Annafi is also on the board of Renew Democracy Initiative, a nonprofit on a mission to renew and advance the values of liberal democracy in the U.S. and around the world. Her op-eds have been published in the Wall Street Journal, The Hill, and USA Today. I hope that everyone has brought the spirit of speaking out to tonight's call. I'll be asking Annafi a few questions myself, and then we'll open it up to Q&A from you guys. So please be thinking of questions, and when you do think of a question, know that others will probably have the same question now or after the call, so please ask it for everyone's benefit. And again, the way that you'll be able to do that is to press 1 on your keypad to raise your hand. And with that, Annafi, I'm going to, you're already off mute. So Annafi, I'll hand it over to you if you could tell us all about your work.
Hi, Kimberly. Thanks so much for having me. Can you all hear me?
You're coming through the airwaves.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here, to be talking to people who are so passionate about politics and getting money out of politics. The Flipside was really created as a way for me to stay informed on what's happening. The good news is, we still do have a free press. We have more media outlets and bloggers than ever. Thanks to the internet, anyone can tweet anything out and it can be read by millions in seconds. The bad news is that there are only 24 hours in a day, and it's really hard for people to keep up with the news between Twitter and all of the news outlets and cable TV and what your friends are saying. And so I thought, hey, as passionate as I am about politics and want to keep up, I have a lot of friends who work long hours or, who just frankly have other priorities that they're not able to commit so much time to figuring out what's going on. So I started sifting through the news on one topic a day and sending my friends articles that I thought were really interesting that they should read, and it kind of took on a life from there. I myself, as Kimberly mentioned, worked for the Hillary campaign, so I'm liberal, and my co-founder is a staunch conservative, and what we do is we shift through the news every day trying to find worthy op-eds and commentary on one issue, and we not only send you the links to the articles themselves, but also curate specific quotes that we think are really worth reading. So what you get each morning, Monday through Friday, is a 5-minute digest on one topic a day, pulling from the best perspectives from both liberal and conservative media. We fact check, we make sure to try to highlight points of view that you may not otherwise hear, and also to find the best argument there is. So some commentators are better than others at communicating simple ideas or complex ideas simply. And so we try to make sure that what we're citing is both approachable and also enlightening. So that's the flip side.
Awesome, thank you. And like I said, I'll kick off a Q&A with some questions of my own. So as we've sent around to folks, you had a great op-ed in the Wall Street Journal about attending the Conservative Political Action Conference as a Democratic woman of color. And it seems that you had an overall positive experience, including a number of great individual interactions. And American Promise was really founded to fill a gap in this landscape of end big money reform movements, in the sense of there needing to be an organization committed to cross-partisanship, and it's really key to our work and to the success of our movement. So I'm curious, in addition to subscribing to the Flipside, which if you're on this call, I definitely recommend you do, what other suggestions do you have for our volunteers, to step out of their bubble, and when they do step out of their bubble, to have those positive experiences?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So yes, please do subscribe to The Flipside. It's theflipside.io. But fortunately, we're not the only ones working to solve this problem. You've got my friend's podcast, Audrey. She actually worked for the RNC back in 2016, and now she has a podcast called Sanity Media, which is also worth looking at, where she highlights different groups working to cross the divide. There's Bold TV, started by Terry Sheffield. So there are a lot of smaller news outlets doing great things. Better Angels is a nonprofit organization that I know pretty well. They hold workshops between liberals and conservatives where they all come together and actually, over a period of several hours, really tackle the difficult questions. So Better Angels, I know, has chapters all over the country. There are, lots of great organizations out there. Unfortunately, they're all underfunded, grassroots. So, for example, us, we're still very much a bootstrapped operation. We've gotten to nearly 20,000 subscribers just via word of mouth and earned media. The Flipside, Better Angel, Sanity Media, Bold TV could all use your support, whether it's by subscribing or listening to their podcasts or joining their workshops or financially. The Flipside definitely has a Patreon page. I think some of the other organizations I mentioned do as well. But in general, when talking to people who think differently from us, I think in this hyper-polarized era, there's a tendency to interrogate. So, oh my gosh, why did you vote for Hillary? Oh my gosh, why did you vote for Trump? Rather than asking, hey, what's motivating you? What are you worried about? What's your biggest fear? What are you most concerned about come 2020 or 2030? What is it that keeps you up at night about your children's future? If we can actually connect with people on what they're concerned about, and then on the flip side, what drives them? What do they think is going well in our country? I don't feel like people ask that question enough. I think there are a lot of things that are seriously wrong, but there are also some things that are going right, and we should talk about that and celebrate that and grow the positive aspects of our current democracy as well. So if we ask more broad questions, we can actually dig deeper and find deeper answers rather than just talking about specific political candidates or parties, and getting to know people on a personal level first, I think really is helpful. So when I was at CPAC, I did say I worked for Hillary, but honestly, a lot of the conversations weren't about the candidates or even the campaigns. It's more, okay, you care about public education. I also care about public education. What do you think is going well in our public school system? What do you think needs improvement? And, how do you go about solving the problem? If you can identify common goals, then the conversation changes from, oh my God, your policies are terrible to, oh, okay, I see, this is your goal and you think this is the way to get it because you've seen it work in Kentucky or you've seen it work in other countries, or, oh, you're worried about big government or XYZ, and then the conversation completely changes because you've already identified a common goal toward which you're working.
Yeah, awesome. I love the, that's also definitely part of our, resonates with the training we provide about relationship building, but especially love that idea of asking people what they like about what's going on in the country. I hope that in my own work and the interactions I get with volunteers that I do my best to impart some optimism and positivity, so I like that spin. Another question, so this month we're asking our volunteers to write letters to the editor encouraging readers to contact their senators about SJ Res 51, which is a bill proposing the 28th Amendment to get big money out of politics. I'm curious, from your work, in curating and seeing what big names in politics have to say about issues, do you have any recommendations for being cross-partisan when talking with politicians in particular, or anything you've noticed in terms of kind of how politicians and their views, special considerations they might have compared with talking with someone who is not a politician?
Yeah, the good and bad news is big money in politics is very much a bipartisan effort. For every Koch brothers, there's a George Soros, there's a Tom Steyer, there's a Murdoch family or the Mercer family, what have you. So when writing letters to the editor, I think it's important. I think there are some people I've seen when trying to draft something for a mass market, they try to use big words, or they try to overcomplicate the issue, or they talk in very political or legalese terms. But people reading the newspaper are just average people. So the clearer you can make your point, don't use fancy language. It's rather than talking about, the corrupting influence, maybe just say something about the fact that every person should have a vote, and corporations, if people in corporations are getting more votes through their money, that means they're getting more voice, something like that, right? Just sort of simpler language. And then in talking with Republicans, it's, from my experience, right, what they often worry about the corrupting influence of big government or federal government or just sort of more government control over their lives. So the more spending there is in government elections, the bigger that the government will inevitably get, right? So I think that's an argument that can appeal to the right. For example, in 2016, Paul Ryan spent $13 million to win his election, whereas his opponent spent $16,000. Now, if that's not inefficient spending, I don't know what is, right? So you can point to those types of examples where big money in politics, actually, so there's a great article in 538 that actually breaks down the effect of big money in politics, and it shows it's not even incredibly effective. You have advertising that kind of sways public opinion a little bit for about a week, but by the week's end, bump in the polls is completely gone. So not only is big money a problem, it's actually not even all that effective in getting the desired outcome. What ends up happening is that it's sort of one of those, if we accept the argument that corporations are people, right? All of these corporations are looking over their shoulders and thinking, oh my God, that corporation is spending money on political candidates, so should I. So there's a lot of inefficiency in political spending, which obviously is just bad all around, but also is not getting the results that corporations think they are, and also it's further cementing government in our way of life. Right? So the more money that's spent, the bigger it gets, the more it balloons, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's what I would emphasize. And again, emphasize the bipartisan public support that getting money out of politics enjoys. And also, yes, the ultimate goal would be to, somehow overturn Citizens United via constitutional amendment, but there are also other things that can be done. I forget in what city or state they're giving people democracy dollars, so a tax break if they spend the money on political candidates. So there are reforms like that are further democratizing the process to make sure it's not only corporations that are having a say. So it's while the ultimate goal should always be pursued, there are other ways of looking at the problem as well, and it could be that your elected official may be more amenable to something like that, and that's a good way for them to get their foot in the door of opening the conversation channel.
Awesome. I can tell you are going to have some fans in our audience. They are always asking for very specific talking points. So yeah, they're. I also would love and will share, that talking point about inefficient spending. Speaking to that very traditional conservative value. For my last question, I'm gonna turn it back to the media. Really, there's a lot of talk these days about doubt in mainstream media and its accuracy. And you and the Flipside is you're tackling the partisanship of media, whether as part of that mission or simply as a smaller news outlet or a news outlet at all. Do you have any insight into what role money plays in undermining media's integrity? Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think by and large, the media companies do kind of do their own thing. I mean, the corrupting influence of money is really chasing profit. And thankfully, profit isn't partisan. It's just profit. And what that unfortunately means, though, is chasing clicks. So in today's Twitter world that we live in, journalists are consistently chasing views and clicks and eyeballs and all of these metrics that social media companies have almost weaponized to control our attention. And what that means is that, this viral story about some celebrity breaking up with some other celebrity is going to get significantly more eyeballs than really thorough investigative journalism, oftentimes. So what ends up happening is that
media companies are not always chasing the stories that are most important, but rather chasing stories that are most likely to go viral. Now, there has always been a profit motive for news corporations. Thankfully, the government does not control the free press. There are some nonprofit companies, but New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, they're all profit-making entities. Now, what that means actually is it's good news in terms of the corrupting influence of money. What the good news is that consumers actually control what media companies will cover. So when I go to networking events, people are lamenting that they want to be chasing important stories, right? They want to track down, expenditure spending by your local officials, but that's not sexy. So if we as consumers, instead of clicking on that viral article about some celebrity, whatever, something dumb that happened, if we instead promoted the actual thoughtful stories that are going to make a difference in our world, that would go a long way. So what I've given talks at high schools and colleges, and I always say, yes, it's easy to, criticize the media, but the media is only giving us what we want. We have to change our behavior first. We have to show up when these, groundbreaking stories are being told. We have to say, yes, there is an audience for this, and the way we can do that is really easy by being that audience. There are a lot of really great journalists out there who are doing this work for very low pay. They're freelancing. They're chasing down stories while being booed at, shouted at, getting death threats on Twitter. And I always encourage people to chase that good journalism as much as you can.
Awesome. Chase the good journalism, and an action item for all of us. Love it. Okay, want to turn it over to our audience now. If you guys, anyone who has a question, if you could press 1 on your keypad, I will call on you. Oh, who will be the brave first soul?
I don't bite, I promise.
I love that. Awesome. Nancy, thank you. You are off mute. If you could let everyone know where you're calling in from and what your question is.
Hi, this is a really interesting discussion. I'm Nancy Morgan. I'm from Northern Virginia. And my question is, a friend of mine, a colleague, AP member at Sally Ridgway, and are reaching out to the Virginia Federation of Republican Women. Okay, we live in Northern Virginia in a blue bubble, and the woman actually got back to me and said, oh, this is interesting, I'll bring it up with their group. And so now I'm terrified because, I think it's a great idea, but when you talk to a conservative group, do you say, that I'm a fiscally conservative, I'm an economist, I'm fiscally conservative Democrat. How do you bridge, you talked about personal experiences, how do you bridge that gap when you're going into a discussion on money and politics?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, I would emphasize that there is broad Republican support for getting money out of politics, and there are plenty of Republicans who are worried about Tom Steyer's spending as Democrats are worried about, Koch brothers spending. I think this is one of those issues where actually there's so much agreement on at least the public sentiment. It's really our elected officials who are holding the ball hostage. Even before we get rid of Citizens United, Congress can pass laws that talk about disclosures, right? So right now, quote-unquote, dark money is out there, not because of Citizens United. Citizens United is completely silent on disclosure. It's on Congress to decide when and how and under what capacity, under what limits and constraints super PACs should disclose who their donors are. So that's Congress's job, not Citizens United, and that's also something that has wide public sentiment support. And I think when, I've been in plenty of rooms where I'm the only Democrat, I'm the only liberal, what have you, and it is scary sometimes, right? You're in the minority, you want to be vocal about your what you believe, but also not sort of create tension. But I think that the way I approach it is I make myself vulnerable first. So I walk in the room and I admit, hey all, I'm a Democrat, I worked for Hillary, I'm a little nervous to be here, but thank you all so much for inviting me. I'll do my best to answer questions from a Democratic perspective, but please know that I don't speak for all Democrats, just as I know, the people in this room don't speak for all Republicans. I would love to focus today on talking specifically about X, Y, Z, and what we can do on a cross-partisan basis. So already you've set the stage, you've said who you are, what you believe, and what you hope to get out of the discussion. And again, if you identify that common goal first to say, okay, today we want to talk about X, Y, Z, then they're like, oh, okay, let's all talk about that. And then hopefully the conversation goes well, and then you stay in touch, and then you can talk about other things. But I think in those types of conversations where there's a stated goal, it's easy to keep coming back to that. And remind them of the Republican lawmakers, former and current, who support this resolution. It's really funny. Once upon a time, it was the liberal jurists who were more advocating that money is speech, and now it's sort of flipped. So I think it really depends on who's in power and who's worried, who's the more vocal opponent of money in politics. But I think what also helps is reminding people that Republicans will not always be in power, just as Democrats will not always be in power. So the way we should legislate, the way we should think about running our democracy is always thinking, okay, what happens if the party I don't support is in power, and legislate that way. That way you can ensure that when the opposition party is in power, that they're at least acting in a way that you find to be faithful to your cause. So right now, it may be the case that Republicans are less disturbed by money in politics because it's going their way. But again, remind them that we have billionaires on our side as well, right? Both parties can bring swords to the fight, so why not just get rid of the sword altogether? That would be my advice.
Thank you. And right, especially on a second, from that, being very candid and authentic, as Annafi suggested, saying I'm, a little bit nervous here. If that's the case, I'm going to do my best to answer, but I don't speak for all Democrats. Just language like that. I think we have time for one more question. If someone has a question, you can press 1 on your keypad to raise your hand, and I will call on you. All right. Looks like, okay. All right. Marie, you are off mute. If you could let everyone know where you're calling in from and what your question is.
Hi, Marie Henselder-Kimmel from Cherry Hill, New Jersey, with the Tri-County American Promise Association chapter here. My question is, you mentioned some really interesting other resources for sort of cross-partisan presentation. I'm very familiar with Better Angels. I've attended a few of their workshops, and I get their email, and I listen to their teleconferences. They're really good. You mentioned another, Family Media, I believe, and I was trying to...
Sanity Media.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
It's called Sanity Media, SANITY.
Sanity Media, okay.
Yes.
And
then there's also Living Room Conversations. There's also Make America Dinner Again. So both Living Room Conversations and Make America Dinner Again are kind of like Better Angels, but a little less formal, where they bring people together over a shared meal. And they typically have an agenda, but it's a little less structured and a little more sort of casual environment where liberals and conservatives get together and just bake bread and get to know each other and talk about issues of the day.
Great. And is there any is there any platform, maybe even in your email or on your website, where some of these other resources are listed or suggested?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, not on our website explicitly, but if you want to send me an email, Annafi@theflipside.io, I have compiled a list and sent it to people via my email address. So, and if you forget the email, theflipside.io, you can find us or, respond to our newsletter or email Kimberly and she can put us in touch. My name is spelled ANNAFI at theflipside.io. That's actually a great idea. We're thinking about creating a blog that we update every once in a while. So we'll definitely put that on the list.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I will second, love the idea. I can do my best to facilitate the exchange of that information. I'll reach out to you, Annafi, to get that, and we can get that in our list in our resource library and include a link to it in the follow-up tomorrow.
Great.
So,
sounds good.
With that, yeah, thank you very much for the offer. Very generous, as well as all of your time and great information tonight. So, Annafi, thank you very much. Appreciate you being on the call.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right, and with that, we will move on to, as we do each month, doing updates on our national goals. Per our APA roadmap, the different parts of it, we have community engagement, meetings with elected officials, and media pieces. We'll start off with meetings with elected officials. Our goal for this year is 200, and we are at 72 meetings right now, considering that we expect about 100 meetings from Lobby Day alone. That is great. Keep it up. Next up, public events. Our goal for 2019 is 80, and we are already at 77, so clearly really crushing it in this area. Keep it up. And last but not least, media pieces. Given our past success in the new APAs that have formed in the last year, our goal for 2019 is 212 media pieces published. Right now we are only at 74, so this is an area for us to work on. As I shared last month, some tips for getting more pieces published is one, to have multiple people writing letters. Experience shows that when a publication receives multiple letters on a single topic, they're more likely to publish at least one of those letters. So if you all get together and write a letter and only one letter gets in, know that you all contributed to that. Other tip is to send all those letters to multiple publications. So you can easily magnify the number of people you reach, by framing your letters in such a way that you can send them to multiple publications just by, with the same letter. And if you have any questions or if there is anything that we can do to help you become letter writing machines, please let me or Rosie, who might be your citizen empowerment point of contact, know what we can do. And of course, the critical step in tracking all of this growth and to make sure, that when you are writing letters that we're getting them into the count, please remember to tell us about your successes. Media pieces published, public events attended, organized, meetings with elected officials you've had, and so those are all things you can submit a reporting form for, which you can do on the resources tab of the website. And this month we also will continue from last month our special updates, our NCLC goals updates. So NCLC is our National Citizen Leadership Conference. It's coming up October 19th to 21st in Washington, D.C. For NCLC, our goal is to have 300 attendees. We are currently at 128. For Lobby Day in particular, which is on Monday, October 21st, our goal is 200 attendees, and we're currently at 82. So if you haven't already and you plan to attend, please do get to citizenleaders.us to register, and then also keep mining your network, your friends of friends, for people to bring to NCLC, and remember that you have those discount codes available. If that's not ringing a bell, talk with your APA leader. There are discount codes available for you, for your friends, to help people get NCLC and Lobby Day people to NCLC on Lobby Day. As much as possible, we don't want finance to be the barrier. So again, that would be something, let Rosie and I know if there's any help we can provide in helping get people there. All right, with that, on to the grassroots victory of the month. This month's grassroots victory is a little bit unique. So, we always enjoy highlighting members, from our volunteer network around the country, but it turns out that us staffers here in American Promise HQ are also people. We can also have grassroots victories, and we did have one among staff. So our very own Azer Cole, state manager, next week will be appearing on New Hampshire Public Television to discuss HB 504, the bill that made New Hampshire the 20th state to call for this amendment. And he'll also be talking about American Promise's mission nationwide on New Hampshire Public Television. As with all grassroots victories, or most grassroots victories, as you guys say, it's, not a single-player sport. Definitely we had help from local citizen leader Jim Howard in New Hampshire. But definitely, something that even us on staff, including Azer, many years doing this full time, something you can feel nervous about, and he'll be doing prep work before the interview. But we wanted to lift up that he's going to be making this splash, and send him luck and congratulations, and hopefully, inspire you guys all to also look for opportunities maybe to step outside your comfort bubbles. We were talking earlier about stepping outside political bubbles. Comfort bubbles, also a thing. All levels, good to step outside of every once in a while. And with that, on to talking about our action, our letter of the month. So this month's letter of the month is writing a letter to the editor, encouraging readers to contact their senators about Senate Joint Resolution 51, or SJ-Res 51. So we've talked about this bill in the last couple of weeks. End of July, Senator Tom Udall, a Democrat from New Mexico, introduced SJ-Res 51 that proposes the Democracy for All amendment language. This is the same language that is proposed in the House by HJR 2. Senator Udall introduced this, with the support and co-sponsorship of all Senate Democrats and Senate Independents, so for a total of 46 co-sponsors. As many of you probably know, our magic number to hit in the Senate is 67. So we've already got all the Democrats and all the Independents. We have to get Republicans on board. So in your letters to the editor, encouraging readers to contact their senators, the asks that you want your neighbors to be proposing to your senators are, one, if they're a Republican, pretty easy. The ask is co-sponsor SJR 51. Let their senator know that this is something that they and fellow citizens, regardless of party, support, and they would like their senator to co-sponsor this bill as well. If your neighbors are reaching out to a Democratic or Independent senator, the ask is, that it is not enough just to co-sponsor, become an active champion of this bill, and because what we need are Republican co-sponsors, we want Senate Democrats and Independents to be working to get their Republican colleagues on board. The action sheet that we've sent out, which was attached to the emails about the call this month, include some background and including the full language of the amendment. One thing that we want to particularly suggest, kind of some specific advice that we realize we haven't been making enough of a point in the past. Is to specifically mention Senator Tom Udall, who introduced SJR 51, as well as Representative Ted Deutch and Representative John Katko, who were the representatives that introduced HJR2. Again, HJR2 is, the House bill that proposes this same language. And so, some of the advice that we've received is that it's helpful for us to have these letters written, that show appreciation for these members, so that, when we are approaching, them for, to ask for their continued support, we can, we have published works to show that our network appreciates them, especially Representative Katko, definitely putting country over party and sticking out as, the only Republican who's co-sponsored either of these bills. And also that when we go to politicians who are not co-sponsors yet, that we can show them, they will receive appreciation and have, political cover should party leadership or PACs come knocking. Any questions? Want to check in, because I know this is a little bit of this is an advanced letter of the month. It's a letter to the editor encouraging readers to contact their senators about SJR 51. Are there any questions about the letter of the month? Also, any questions about SJR 51 or HJR 2 or the Democracy for All amendment language? If you have any questions, you can press 1 on your keypad, and I'd love to call on you again. Anytime now, feel free to press 1 on your keypad. I'll emphasize again that if you have a question that's on your mind, it's something that other people are going to have on their mind as well, and if they're listening to the recording, they won't have the chance to ask that question. So if there are any questions, I would love to address them right now. Nancy, I see your hand is up. Nancy, I know you were on earlier, but if you could just remind folks where you're calling from and let me know what your question is.
Sure. Thanks, everybody. Nancy Morgan again from Northern Virginia. And I mentioned this to Johannes in an email. I was recently at a picnic and trying to talk to my legislators, state legislators, about supporting the resolution in the General Assembly. And it's very difficult. I mentioned it's very difficult with incumbents, and even my liberal delegate, he's going, Nancy, it's just a symbol. What does it matter? Because if we pass it in Virginia, we're the 21st state. What is going to force congressional action, even if you get up to 30, unless it's a binding resolution? So I felt sort of depressed after that.
Oh, man. Well, thank you for sharing, because I think it's so important for us all to recognize that we have these shared experiences of down moments. So, I will definitely say to you, Nancy, and, for on everyone's behalf, because I know we're all going to run into these moments, keep up the good work. You are fighting the good fight, and we will be successful. Know that there are down moments, but you have to, know that those kind of moments of pessimism certainly happened in every other battle for, the constitutional amendments that have come before, that have given us the rights we now consider so fundamentally American, the right of people of color to be citizens, the right for women to vote. Those were also hard battles, and your work is certainly not for naught. State resolutions show that there is support in the state for this amendment, for getting money out of politics, so that when you approach your congressional level elected officials, members of the U.S. House of Representatives or U.S. Senators, that you have this resolution to show that, that's a big thing, and it's not something that they dismiss. I've seen how at all levels, even local resolutions can influence, and make a difference for especially representatives that are supposed to represent, smaller areas. These official statements that show constituents and other, elected officials down the ballot support this measure do make a difference. So yeah, absolutely know that. John, you are off mute. If you could let everyone know where you're calling in from and what your question is.
Hello, this is John House calling from Santa Fe, New Mexico. And actually I can respond to, Nancy's dilemma.
Please.
Yeah. Actually, I ran into the same comment, or a very similar one, in 2018 when we were trying to get the Fix It America version of the 28th Amendment passed, or a resolution passed in the New Mexico State Legislature. And I ran into a Democratic congressman who is a good congressman, and he supports, lots of democratic reforms, such as ranked choice voting and open primaries and so forth. And so I was talking to him about the 28th Amendment resolution that was in the legislature last year, which actually did pass. And I talked to him, and he said, "Hey, look, I'm for it. I'm going to vote for it, but I see it as largely just symbolic. Here I am. I'm a state legislator. Really, what does that matter what I say?" And I said, "Well, I understand, but I actually disagree with you." I said, "First, of course, as you know, if such an amendment is ever passed, it's got to go right back to the states for ratification. And secondly," I said, what do you think the effect will be of all these state resolutions? If on Congress, if when a resolution does finally come up for a vote in Congress, if the members know that there are 40 or 50 states, 45 states out there who have passed these resolutions, don't you think they're going to take that more seriously? And he kind of stepped back and said, "I never thought about it that way." So that's, I think, is a good response to that kind of a question.
Absolutely, I will second that. I think right. For those of us in the movement, we can all forget how obvious that seems, and right. Perhaps the answer is just pointing out the obvious, that we respectfully disagree. Exactly. Imagine what a difference it will make if when it comes time to vote on the Senate or House floor, instead of 20 states, we have 40 states. So thank you. As always, the APA network is the magic of it all, and just connecting you guys to share answers with one another. John, did you have a question that I could address?
No, but I did have another comment, and that is, here in New Mexico, there's really nobody for me to write to support the Senator Udall's amendment. All our members of Congress are Democrats, and they support it, except for one. So yeah, we do write to that one House person, but who's in the southern conservative part of the state. But I thought about what else I could do, and so I'm encouraging friends in conservative states like Texas to write a letter to the editor in support of SB 51 and HJRES 2.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. Right, absolutely. Love that idea as well. I do want to point out, maybe this is an opportunity, or kind of like raises an awareness that we were perhaps not clear enough. The idea that we pitched, and again, that was not to say that this, another idea of calling friends in other states is not also a good idea. We were thinking it's, the ask is for readers to contact your U.S. senators. So, even in New Mexico, where Senator Tom Udall was the one who introduced it, potentially, which is to say, whether it's New Mexico or if you're in a state where both of your senators are Democrats or independents, right, both your senators are already co-sponsors of SJR 51, but there is still something for people to ask of them, and that is for those senators to be really committed in trying to get their Republican colleagues on board. On the Republican side, we're asking them to put country over party and to not, as Republicans, avoid these bills for out of fear of party leadership. But just as much, we have to ask our Democratic elected officials to put country over party and to rather than use this as a partisan talking point in the next election, to really constructively work with their Republican colleagues and find out what they can do to get them on board. All right. Want to get to, I see, Marie, I see that your hand is up. I will call on you. I'm going to do my best to answer your questions succinctly so you can get to training, but know that you've always got good thought-provoking questions. So if you could let everyone know what your question is.
Hi. So, Kimberly, actually, it's sort of another follow-up to Nancy and John's comments,
Great.
And that is that when I even do an educational program for community members about what the whole idea is with the resolution and how an amendment is passed, I always emphasize that it's really a circular it's a circular process. So if we have the state pass a non-binding resolution, that helps to put pressure on our congressional representatives to pass the amendment resolution out of Congress, but it also then keeps our local community informed and educated so that we don't have situations, like Equal Rights Amendment, where it was passed through Congress, but then they could never get it through the various states. If you're already working on educating your, the state citizenry on what the importance of this is, then they're going to be primed to ratify it state by state and make it an official amendment that much more quickly, because we do have to get around to that part of the amendment process as well. So that was my one point. My other comment was on actually what John said, because I'm in New Jersey, and I have two Democratic senators who have already signed on and did in the previous Congress. But it is important for them to hear that there's still a lot of their support in the community, and people keep talking about this because it does encourage them to be proactive about building support, like we want them to across the aisle with Republican senators that they may have working relationship with, and to understand that it is a priority in terms of democracy reform, that we really need to, get this done. So when we saw Menendez last year on Lobby Day, we didn't meet with him, we met with his staff, but they said, look, the calls that he gets in, the letters that he gets continuing on a topic means to him that his constituents feel very strongly about this topic. They didn't just tell him once, they're telling him over and over and over again, and the pressure is continuing. So that means, this is something that he's got to make a priority in his legislative work.
Awesome. Thank you, Marie. As always, never regret calling on you. Yes, following up, again, and thank you again, Nancy, for sharing this story of hardship, because it's good for us to acknowledge that we're having these experiences, and to give other members a chance to lift us up and provide the solution to our problem. So John's point about point out the obvious, that no, that's not the case. That these resolutions do make a difference for our representatives in DC, and Marie's point that it's going to go back to the states, and is your state ready to ratify? Are your elected officials still aware of this, because they still have people meeting with them? So thank you, everyone. Going to round out the call tonight talking about our bonus action of the month. is to phone a friend or a family member, and by phone, that can be an in-person conversation, not speaking too literally here, but encourage you to reach out to someone and talk with them about attending NCLC, and inspired by our guest speaker, would encourage you to perhaps talk with someone who is outside of your political bubble, and just cannot second her advice more. As we do in our trainings about how to conduct a meeting with an elected official, I think this conversation would largely make similar recommendations about, start with something where you can say thank you to this person, or in some way show appreciation for them and or their views, and then find a good open question that you can ask genuinely and find common ground. So I love Annafi's suggestions. What motivates you? What concerns do you have for our children's future? What do you think is going well in our country? Get to know, talk with these people, even if they are friends or family. I'm sure these conversations can still bring new things to light, and then find a way from there to pivot to, or perhaps you kind of bring it up at the beginning, but then come back to, we have this National Citizen Leadership Conference coming up, and this is an issue. Getting big money out of politics is something that is cross-partisan. And there are a number of great points that you can make, to point out to why, this will be a good experience for them. NCLC and Lobby Day are great ways for people to get introduced to this movement. You're going to be meeting people from across the country and, taking action alongside them in an exciting environment. In many ways, NCLCs are our celebration of the year, and so it's great for someone to start off with the celebration so that they have motivation, to go back to their community and do a year of work, knowing what they will get to, wanting to have even more reason to celebrate next year. But American Promise was founded to be cross-partisan, so that was definitely, that's definitely something I would point out in this conversation. This is an organization committed to cross-partisanship. I'm going to NCLC, and I know that you've got different views, and so it would be a great testimony to exactly what we're trying to do, to have people of different opinions there. We also, do our best to make sure that on our advisory board, we have people from across the political spectrum, so that you can, show we're not just talking it, we really are a cross-partisan organization. We have Jim Leach, former Republican representative from Iowa, Alan Simpson, former Republican senator from Wyoming, on our advisory board. And so, some, again, things to think about in having that conversation about, someone from outside your political bubble, how you can, really show them and, speak genuinely as to why they will not be the only one with their views there, and why they will be welcome. And again, would circle back to in just a second Annafi's suggestion, talking about the bipartisan support that this issue has, and speaking to some traditional conservative talking points. So, a concern about inefficient spending. Can we think of more inefficient spending than the millions of dollars being spent on negative ads? So that is the bonus action for the month. We are coming up on the hour, so I don't think we're going to have a chance to role play, but if you have any questions about that, you've got my number, you've got Rosie's number, hopefully, or if you don't, talk to your APA leader, and they certainly do, and we would definitely be happy to talk you through those conversations, because we're excited for NCLC. We're doing a lot of work for it right now, and want to get as many people as possible to it to take part in the celebration. But also that ability to have those kind of cross-partisan conversations is hugely important in our work, to grow this movement, because this is not something that is going to be won with the supporters of just one party, but it's also not something that has to be won. again, thank you, Annafi, for pointing out this is something with bipartisan support, and so we need to harness all that support. And so hope that you guys, want to make sure you guys are empowered to do that and have those conversations with people outside of your political bubble. All right, we have hit the hour, so I'm going to take everyone off mute so that we can all say good night. Thank you all for joining. Have a nice week.